Hey folks, it's Bear Gardner, and it's time to get to yet another part of my views and comments on the card reveals for Blood and Iron, which is the expansion for cards, which is coming next week, November the 28th, in fact. So, as ever, down below, YouTube, like, subscribe, all that stuff. Check me out on Twitch. If you feel the urge, hit the support link. Give a single donation, subscribe monthly, Twitch sub. There are things you can do to support the content if you so wish, but I don't like making a big thing of it. What we're going to do, as we've done before, is I'm going to just sit for a while and go through a bunch of the new cards that we're seeing for cards as Blood and Iron comes out and talk about their impact. We've certainly got some interesting ones coming up on this. So, as usual, this will be nation by nation, main nation by main nation, and then allied nations alphabetically. So we'll be starting with the Brits and rolling our way through, and I'll talk about what I see and what I think. So, let's go do it. Okay, so it's Brits, and let's open up by literally opening up a big old can. So this is where we open a big tier and a whole new thing, and many of you will be looking at this card, reading it, and going, what? So this is a new Britain Elite. This is Desert Dust. Desert Dust pins something, which we knew was going to be a sub-theme for the Brits, and then it adds 2 Garrison units to your support line. So, let's talk about Garrison, which will be appearing down here. So, Garrison is a new token that can be summoned by Britain. Garrison is a 1-cost, 1-op cost unit, should it be bounced back to your hand or something similar. It is a 0/3 guard, but it has the text, at the start of your turn, deal 1 damage to the enemy HQ if this unit was not attacked last turn. So this is a whole new thing. So we talked about the fact that Britain was going to get punish mechanics, and I know some people are less fascinated by it. I personally think it's interesting and should probably be okay. It's just going to be an archetype that you're going to have to get used to dealing with. However, I do know that there are some people who are a little concerned, and understandably so, about how powerful this might be in a nation that has access to an awful lot of stall, heal, and is getting more pin support. So we saw the bigger units, the actual from-hand units, earlier in the reveals, which allowed Britain to have cards that punish if they're not attacked. This is obviously a significant punish. However, things to note about Garrison. Firstly, Garrison has been designed with guard, so Garrison is always going to be targetable. That is useful, because if you really want to get rid of it, of course, if you're pinned, you can't do anything, and the Garrison is ticking, that could be very devastating. So this is quite a strong card, because if you, on turn 3, if you can pin a target unit and drop 2 Garrison, unless your opponent can get a good blitz out to follow, because they can't obviously operate the unit that they've got on the board if they've only got 1 unit on the board to deal with the Garrison, then at the start of your next turn they're taking 2 damage, and then you can do whatever you need to do to continue to keep that live. Of course, to really be able to do this, you're going to have to find a way to do either a lot of pinning, a lot of controlling, or a way to either buff up your Garrison to have defences. Now, obviously, cup of tea is the thing, let's not forget that. So there is the potential for this to be a very, very frustrating archetype to play into. However, there are suppression tools, and it is possible that the units are not, they are eminently removable. I'm not sure they're as eminently removable as I'd want them. I'm not entirely sure that I wouldn't have preferred Garrison as a 0/2, but we'll see. Like, I will say, I am of the opinion that this is going to be an archetype that is going to get played, and is probably going to be reasonably good. There are ways around it. Obviously, there's a lot of credit acceleration, and there's plenty of removal and AoE out here, but this thing, obviously, Garrison by default is out of range of things like Desperate Measures or Bomber Mafia, which is not nothing. Anyway, It's really hard to talk about Desert Dust without Garrison, and that's going to be a theme, because, spoilers, there are more cards relating to this new method coming for the Brits, because this is a big part of what Britain is getting. Anyway, overall, Desert Dust is a strong card, but it's also an elite card, and I think it's safe to say that how good or bad this kind of control and punish mechanic and archetype is going to be for Britain is going to depend on what other support it's got. So, hey, why don't we go find out? Okay, so let's roll on to... I did say there was more support coming for this. This is Entanglement. This is also strong. This is pretty good. And I shall explain why. So, the deal is that this is a countermeasure that allows you to trigger it when a unit is attacked, giving your unit +2 defense, and then adding a garrison unit to your support line. Now, there's a whole set of reasons why this could be incredibly problematic. 1, it's cheap. 2, it's a standard card. 3, +2 defense is really strong for an early countermeasure, and thus it's almost certainly going to spawn Garrison off it, and this is incredible for protecting your Garrison. Because obviously, if you've already got a couple of Garrison or a Garrison on the board, and then this protects it, you get another one, and then your opponent ends their turn and is taking yet another point of damage to their HQ. You can clearly follow me on the issue here with the potential to snowball. I personally think this might be one of the more problematic cards in this archetype, because I think this is very well costed. It's a bit cheap for how strong it is, because it also doesn't critically have a piece of text that I sort of expected it to have, which is... I kind of expected this to have, when your unit is attacked, give it +2 defense. If it survives, add a garrison unit to your support line. Note, this gives you a delayed garrison unit for 1... It effectively plays garrison for its normal cost on your opponent's turn, as long as it triggers. That's not nothing, given that Garrison can continue to stack. Now, I just want to be clear that there is the potential for this to really annoy people, because it can not only protect an already dangerous unit that is doing something negative to you, because that's a lot of what we're seeing, but at the same time it can spawn yet another really irritating guard. We'll see, but again, this is almost certainly going to be an absolutely critical part of the archetype. Hey-ho, it's another Garrison-focused card. I did say this was going to be a theme. This is Frontier Force. This is pretty good. So, it's not got Guard, which when you look at its stats, you initially expect that it would have Guard, but it kind of sort of does, because it adds Garrison to your support line. It has Fury, which is not nothing. The reason it's not nothing is that there are ways, particularly for Brits, to turn defense to attack. Synthetic rubber on this. Ouch. Even Coldstream Guards onto the board, a card I personally think might see some play with the way that this new archetype is shaping out, to then put naval support onto this, make it a 5/5. 5/5 with Fury, that's scary. So this is another card that you kind of need to deal with before it becomes a problem. And of course, that's the entire theme of this, is putting lots and lots of cards that need dealing with on the board and making your opponent have to figure out the order in which to deal with them. Now, I'm actually a huge fan of this as an idea, because I think it's really interesting. I think it creates an interesting trade puzzle and lets you kind of have to figure out the optimal way to resolve something under a bit of pressure. However, this deck as an archetype, if it gets up and running, could be quite daunting, and yet again, this is a standard card. So expect to see it, at least early. Will it hang around? I don't know. I don't know whether it's that super strong as part of this package, whether this package will eventually need thinning down to really slick out your deck, but we'll see. But yeah, it's pretty good. The value's very decent on this. Right, Soviet time, and this is the 12th Guards Mechanised Division, or 12th Guards Mechanised. And this is a veteran, in effect. This is a veteran archetype card, so this is very cheap. It is a solid 1-drop with decent stats and smokescreen, and it becomes veteran when you deploy a tank with 4 or more attack. Its veteran is okay, it gets blitz, so it can act, which is kind of good if you can proc it on the same turn, because then obviously it can act. You can put this down, drop your T-34, which obviously is one of the tank types, anything with 4 or more attack, but I'm going to go with the T-34 because that's the archetype that's being pushed at the minute. And then it pops that and has blitz, and then it gets draw 2 cards when this unit becomes a veteran. I love this card. I outright love this card. I love this card because this card gives the Soviets something that they have been badly hurting for in an interesting way. This gives Soviets access to reliable, standard draw that's cheap. Yes, you have to proc the veteran on it, so you do have to do a little bit of a song and a dance to get it, but Soviets are used to having to do a song and a dance to get most anything. This is on par with Sickle for a way of getting access to it. Drawing 2 cards when this veteran's is not small. The card itself is not insanely powerful. It's a 2/2 once it goes up, and that's okay. It can do some work for you, but that's not what it's here for. Its primary focus is to give you a cheap body that gets you draw. Genuinely, I really like this. I think this is going to see a lot of play, because Soviet main decks have always wanted to find ways to get good draw. So, and with the new tank focus, you're not going to struggle to deploy tanks with 4 or more attack, and it's not like the Soviets don't have a good range of tanks with 4 or more attack. So yeah, I like this card. I think this card's going to see play. I think it's a super kind of it's kind of a super cheap Soviet Sherman in many respects, in that it creates the draw, but you've got bigger hoops to jump through, and it is infantry. But yeah, I quite like this. I think it's a pretty decent card. I think people are going to have to get their heads around timing playing this card well, because there is the risk that it just gets popped before you can do anything with it. Smokescreen helps a little bit, but ultimately you really want to get the veteran on this for the value. Overall, decent card. Very happy with that. Good sign for the Soviets, we hope. Right, it's another Soviet veteran. It's another Soviet veteran that procs its veteran when you deploy a tank with 4 or more attack. Obviously, we can see that this is going to be a thing. As I said, it doesn't surprise me at all. I think it's interesting, given that they want to push the more heavy armoured mentality. So the big question is this one as good? And it's a limited card, so you'd expect it to be better, and it costs more. So what does this do when it veterans? Well, once again, it gets an attack buff, only the 1 point, and it gets blitz. That's nice, heals itself up and can blitz. Then it gets your tanks operate for 1 less. Say that again in a tank-focused meta. Your tanks operate for 1 less. This is huge. This is enormous on your T-34s. This is an immensely strong card that, if it procs, enables, because it doesn't just affect the cards on board. As long as this thing is around, all of your tanks are operating for 1 less, so ideally you put this on the board while you're in good condition. It sits in the support line while your Soviet tanks batter the life out of your opponent. This will be quite possibly an integral part of getting tempo and pace out of the T-34 deck. I love the design. Once again, I think it's nice that it fits in again with the theme of it, and once again, yes, we are seeing the focus on driving forward this T-34 archetype, which clearly we're going hard for, and I don't mind that. The Soviets need a kind of a core spinal archetype anyway, so we might as well just go with Soviet armor. Overall, I don't know. We're going to see how it's all how good this card is immensely going to depend on how good the cards it can proc off are. I will say it isn't only a Soviet card though. There are plenty of, say, German tanks that you could get through Blitz Doctrine that wouldn't object to having this thing veteran out either. Just FYI. This card has the potential to see a huge amount of play in an armor-focused meta. Now, it's not like the US are going to object to seeing it with Shermans either. Just saying. I imagine we're going to see a lot of the 269th, and quite possibly a lot of Soviet ally, as well as some Soviet main. Could be wrong, but, you know, at me, chat to me in chat if you Discord, whatever. Talk to me if you disagree, but I think this is interesting. It's definitely strong. Reduced operation cost is never bad. Okay, 654th Rifles. This is an interesting card. So, 654th is infantry with shock. It's 2-4, so it's not an incredibly strong piece of infantry, but it's survivable, and it has shock, which is, as we've established, so shock is the new keyword where the first time that a unit with shock attacks in a battle, it takes no damage in retaliation and loses shock. So unless you've got some way of prolonging it or putting it back on again, it's a one-shot thing, but it means it doesn't take... its first swing takes no retaliation damage. Can be pretty good. This has deployment. Add a T-70 to your support line. Give it shock. T-70 is the 3-2 guard tank. It's like 1-op cost, 2-cost tank. So in effect, you're getting 5-6 worth of stats, both with shock on this. Notably, the T-70 does not have blitz, but does have guard. But shock on guard is an interesting one. I mean, it gives the... It's particularly interesting on the T-70, because the T-70 is a very weird guard anyway, because it's low defense compared to its attack, so you're not quite sure what you're doing with it. This gives it a chance to pop that high attack to do something before it kind of gets affected. If somehow it hasn't already been attacked and removed before your opponent ends their next turn, there is a whole part of me that just looks at this and wonders if it's going to just be far too unwieldy to be good. Because without blitz, you're waiting on positioning, and is T-70 really that good, even with shock? It depends. If you're able to deploy all of this in a position whereby you've got enough protection, ideally you would have the front line, put these on your support line, and then use them next turn. They are potentially... shock has the potential to be a very good tempo swing mechanic, but that is a different question, depending on circumstance. Anyway, 654 is an interesting design. It's also, it doesn't, while it does go into the armoured thing, and it does do a bit of shock, it doesn't really roll into the T-34 archetype, so I don't know. We're going to have to wait and see. I'm unconvinced about this card. But I've been wrong many, many times before, and maybe it'll turn out that shock's incredibly good and a 2-3 guard tank with shock is somehow really broken. But overall, I'm kind of a bit indifferent about this card. But that's okay, because we've seen some really solid Soviet cards. Which, by the way, they really need. Right, speaking of solid Soviet cards, this is one that I quite like, if only for the design. This is Hull Down. Also, I quite like the art on this card. Hey, it's my first art reference, I think. At me if I'm wrong, but I think this is the first art reference I've made in this recording session. Who knew? So, Hull Down, standard card, which is nice. It's not overly expensive. Choose tank in hand. Or when it is deployed, it gets +1/+2 and fights a random enemy unit. This is kind of like Claim the Skies, but for tanks. It's potentially really busted. It is potentially really, really quite broken. Especially if you could, for example, use this on a tank that has shock. Just saying. I mean, even without shock, it's still getting +2 defense, +1 attack. This is kinda good. But it's kind of situational. I don't know whether it's good enough at its cost that it'll see a lot of play, but I wouldn't be surprised. Because I like it. I like the idea of representing hold down as a tactic. You can go Google that. But I like this quite a lot. I think this is really interesting tech for Soviets to have, and leaning into the fight and giving them the defense. So now you have the potential that units other than aircraft coming out of Soviets, and we might actually see a Soviet archetype that revolves around this. I mean, if somehow you can get the bomber out that gives units with heavy armor bonuses every time they survive combat, and then play this on a heavy armor tank in your hand, and then deploy that, and then claim the skies with the bomber, and then you get the buffs that are rolling, and then it continues to survive and snowballs. There's an explorable archetype in here. I just think it's the only downside with it is it's going to be quite heavy and slow, which kind of fits the theme. But yeah, I honestly think this is an interesting card. How good it is will depend on how much it's adapted to the meta and how many people actually just adopt this card for play. But I like it. I think it's interesting. I think it gives the Soviets yet another tool to do interesting things with tanks. And Lord knows the Soviets really do, if you have not noticed by now, really do need some help right now. So, speaking of Soviet tanks with heavy armour, almost like I planned this stuff, this is the T-3476D. This is pretty good for a standard card. It's situational, but it has got some very good value. Because it thins your deck. Notwithstanding the fact that this is just a good value for cost tank. Yes, the op cost's a thing, that's always been the case with big heavy tanks like this, but it fits the 4 attack or more thing that you're going to need. It's got heavy armour, so it's survivable and could fit with a number of other things that you can do. It's a T-34, and it has destruction. Draw a T-34 from your deck and reduce its cost by 2. Note, not a T-3476D, just any T-34 in your deck that then gets reduced cost. Like, this is not a bad card. This is not a bad card at all, and I really want to be clear about that. There are a number of things that this could pull. The T-34 1942, obviously, if you pull that and reduce it to a 3-cost card, that's 3-cost 5/5 with Blitz, is pretty good. And you've already got the value out of trading this. There are a number of other T-34s. I should probably do a T-34 deck at some video at some point, and I might if I get into doing conversations about archetypes. But this has the potential to be a very strong card, and again integral to this T-34 deck, which is starting to get quite weighty with cards that fit the archetype. So the question is going to be, how many of these do you run, and is this a central card? I think it kind of might be, because deck thinning is never bad. And again, standard card, great for new players. Another thing I want to note about seeing a lot of the stronger Soviet cards that we're seeing are not fitting always the previous pattern that we've had, which is that Soviets have kind of indifferent standard and limited cards and utterly busted elites. We're seeing some good value standard and limited cards, and that's very good for new players. As someone who does a lot of new player content, it makes me very happy because it gives me a direction you can point new players in where they can pad out a deck with some good T-34 tech, and they don't have to find the resources to throw together like 7 elites to make a decent Soviet deck. So honestly, I like to see this. I'm quite happy with this as a card. I look forward to seeing how much play it sees, and I personally really look forward to seeing how good the T-34s become in the meta. I think they might be rather good. Alright, time to arrive at the United States, and we get the 62nd Armored Infantry. This is another really good 4-drop. Seriously. So this is just good value. Its stats are on point. Like, as a unit, as infantry, it is exactly where you'd want it on cost. It's a 4/4 with 1 op cost for 4. Its deployment effect is great. Your Shermans, yes, this is the Shermans thing, get +2/+2. Really good. If you don't have any, add an M4 Sherman to your hand. There is no downside to playing this card. There legitimately is no downside to playing this card if you want to play the Sherman's deck. There just isn't. It's just good. It's just solid. This is a great card in draft. This is a great card early in the game when you're climbing ladder because it's just good value. This is just a strong card. It's not busted. It's not insane. It's not world-ending. It's just really solid. It's a central kind of pivotal card that's just a bit stronger than perhaps it should be, which is exactly where I want to see limited cards land. I like the design of this. It could be bonkers if played in the right way, but there is no downside to this, because either you're strengthening a board state that you've built with your Shermans, or you're getting access to a Sherman that you can then actually, get draw off of. Love this, very happy to see it. Right, the 306th. Okay, so this is an interesting card for me. This is another value card. So this kind of fits the same methodology that we've seen for US draw in the past, in that US has conditional draw. We know the M4 Sherman with its if you control the front line, draw 2 cards. This is a credit cheaper and gets draw a card if you control another unit with 4 or more attacks. So obviously it can't proc off itself. That would be busted. However, this is very, very proccable, and it's good draw. I like that it's only draw 1 card. I think this is very well costed, very well placed, and is a relatively competitive card in many US decks that are looking for draw. It is not as efficient as a Sherman, but it is less conditional, and it's a decent body. Is this card anything massively special? Probably not. Is this card likely to see a chunk of play? Probably. Very probably. It's got just decent stats, decent value, and a good deployment effect, and it's a standard card. Again, it's just on-point value, and I'm never going to complain about that, because this is another card that is just good as a useful card that you can get hold of if you open it from a pack as a new player. You can slam this into a US deck and get some value out of it. Nothing wrong with that. It's not quite as universal as the previous card, because obviously it's not, you can't add anything, so it could just whiff and not do anything and you just get a 3-cost 4/3. But I mean, I'm not sad to get a 3-cost 4/3 infantry. I can get better, but I can live with the 3-cost 4/3 infantry. Overall, just a solid card. Right, here's a card that's already provoked some conversation. This is the Calliope. Firstly, let's be clear, the Calliope is a Sherman. Don't at me, I'm not a tank historian, but the Calliope is a Sherman. For game purposes, the Calliope is a Sherman, and it's really quite good. This is a really good piece of artillery. It has the usual artillery drawback. It has a high op cost. Generally, you don't get artillery with 1 or 0 op cost that has decent attack. This has attack 2, which is decent on artillery. You'd like to buff it, but you're not going to complain. It has deployment. Distribute 2 damage between target and adjacent units. This is targeted deployment damage. Targeted and adjacent enemies, of course, also includes HQ. So you can just pop this down and pink HQ with it. This can give you some great AoE. I think this is a very strong card, especially as a standard. I would not be surprised to see some form of change making its way towards this card at some point. Whether it be seeing its defense dropped, its attack dropped, or its cost increased. I have a feeling we're going to see a lot of this card. I have a feeling this card is going to engender a great deal of moaning and shouting and tearing of hair that I don't have for some people when it lands, because it's very good value. Anything that is just doing directed damage when you deploy it is always kind of good. Honestly, we'll see how much it ends up being busted, but this as a 3-drop, this has good value. Because note, you can drop this at a time when that 2 points of damage could be very significant. This is not like pinging a couple of points of damage late in the game. So this is turn 3. When your opponent, this could absolutely blow out aggro decks. Utterly. It could just kill so much tempo, because not only does it deploy, killing 1 or 2 units, it also puts a body on the board that you struggle to deal with, and in and of itself, it can continue to peer out of it. If you can get artillery to stick in this game, it's good, because reach is powerful, and artillery is not protected by fighters or guards. It goes past both, which is why, if you can get it to stick, it's very good. It's why certain big, heavy artillery cards are really strong if you can get them to hang around on the board. And this gives itself much better chance of hanging around on the board, because played on curve, there is a good chance that this clears most of the board, which makes it very hard to remove quickly, and if it stays, it can just keep ponking threats as it goes, which is why I'm very glad it has 2 op cost. Anyway, we'll see where it goes, but I have a feeling this is going to be a very strong card. Okay, time for the USA to get a veteran card, and it's the Cyclone Division. Big stats. Okay, we've seen this. There is a theme towards big stat cards for the US in this expansion. Cyclone Division, hugely expensive at 6 cost, massive 8/8 infantry that obviously is a special card. Deployment, add a Sherman to hand, becomes veteran when you've deployed 2 Shermans. I assume this is a random Sherman from the many Sherman pool, so who knows what you could get. You could get Calliope. Once you pop 2 Shermans, this reduces its operation cost from 3 to 0, and then adds a random Sherman to your hand with Blitz. This card is crazy. This card is crazy value if you can get it to trigger. This is, whether it will see play is a whole different question, but in a deck that wants to ramp to 3 op cost ramp, because hey look, 3 op cost card, to then get the potential to drop a Sherman with Blitz. You add a Sherman, so you get a free card when you deploy it, then you add another Sherman to your hand. Again, this is add, it's not draw, so these cards are being conjured out of the ether and added to your deck. So this card is in effect 3 cards. It's 8/8 and heals itself to full when it's veteran, so if you can use this in some crazed way, like, I don't know, drop full freedom on it, beat on things a bit while you're deploying your Shermans, and it's down to like its last health, and then suddenly, plink, it's an 8/8 again, and you've got a blitzing Sherman tank. Like, legitimately, there are ways that this could be incredibly strong. There are also ways that this could just be too slow, but there is ramp in the game right now, so I'd expect to see people try this out. It's potentially really quite good. Alright, Allied Nations time, and Finland! This is Order of the Day. This is another card that goes into this shift towards trying to put a new theme outside of salvage. This adds a new kind of focus on Sissi, a very important concept from Finland in the war. Anyway, that's the history lesson, but it's interesting to find some focus on this. It's a very cool piece of artwork. So this is a standard card. This is kind of important to remember, I personally think. So this says add 2 Sissi to your support line. your sissy get, it costs the enemy +1 credit to target or attack this unit. So let's be clear, this card is just cracked. Used well, this card is utterly cracked, because you can run 4 of the damn things, and you can combine them with the new stuff that can turn your sissies into 4/4s, and even if you can't turn them into 4/4s, having to pay an extra credit to attack a unit that instantly destroys the thing you've attacked it with sucks. This is genuinely way better than I think some people have realised. This is an incredibly annoying card to deal with, and it's proliferate enough that it's going to keep coming around. Genuinely expect to see this see play, and expect to be annoyed by it. It is quite good. And it pushes this new sissy idea. But don't underrate how powerful this could be. Used right, this is just bonkers. We all know from experience how, well, at least many of us do, know from experience how annoying and how frustrating it is to have anything that costs extra credits to attack or target. Because it makes it hard to remove. Honestly, this is pretty cool. Again, my one silly downside, which I've mentioned about the sissy thing when talking about the previous card, which is the one that can make them into 4/4s, the real issue with this is, does Finland really need any more weight as an ally? It's already pretty good value as an ally. This does kind of thin the pool in draft a little, though, which I wonder if is a consideration. Because at the moment, Finland as an ally in draft is really strong, because not only are you likely to get some just good value cards, kind of an awful lot of its stuff is quite synergistic, because it only has one really big mechanic, which is salvage. This puts a different one in there, which might lower the synergy, and therefore might actually, draft goblins, let me know what you think, but this might actually lower Finland's stock when it comes to being an ally in draft. If only because you're having to pick between 2 really crazy things that you can do, rather than just being almost guaranteed to get value out of one good piece of synergy. Anyway, just my thoughts. This is indeed the order of the day. Right, Polish Exile M4. This is the Firefly. This is just decent. Really is just so good if played well. So the Firefly has good stats as a 5/4. But it has, when a friendly unit is attacked, give it +1/+1 before damage. So this is like a defense and attack buff countermeasure that's just sat on your board and triggers for all of your friendly units. In a frontline deck that is trading and trying to keep the frontline, this thing could be nuts. Do I think it'll see a huge amount of play? I think it's going to very much depend on competition for slots, but this is a good, solid value card. It has the potential to pay for itself and then some. Frankly, a 5/4 tank for 5 isn't terrible. It's also Exile, Hammer Home. Just saying. But this is potentially really quite good. So we'll see, but it's interesting design space, because this kind of global defensive effect that also causes damage to, in effect, you're doing a damage to your opponent and making your unit 1 more point survivable, could be huge. Definitely goes on my list of things to try when it comes to like mid-range decks that run Poland ally, which I think are becoming more of a thing. Like it. Right. Okay, this is the Zamość Uprising. Polish people, let me know if my pronunciation's good. I think it is. Zamość Uprising is cracked. Yeah, that out of the way. Just this card is cracked. The art is beautiful. The card is bonkers. A number of you may be looking at me like an alien right now and wondering what could possibly be so bonkers about this card. Cards like Admiral Hipper that bounce things are really strong. And Admiral Hipper's an elite. This bounces a unit, retreats a target unit, gives you intel too, and is a standard card. So in a Legions deck, This gives you tempo, board position, removes tempo from your opponent, and buffs your units. What more do you want? Really, what more do you want? This card is insane. This card is very, very strong. This card probably wants a nerf. I could be wrong, but I personally think this card is cracked. I think this card will see play in Legions decks. I think this card will see a lot of play in Legions decks, because Intel 2 is just, it's crazy. Getting Intel off of being able to retreat a target unit, I can see this also with the new Brit archetype. This thing has insane synergy with controlling the board. This is such a good tool, and I have a horrible feeling people are going to sleep on this until they realise how good this card actually is. But I personally think this card is utterly cracked. I mean, I love it, I intend to play it, but I think it's cracked. I think it's way too good for its value. More particularly, I think it's way too good for its rarity. I think as perhaps a limited or special card, this would be fine. As a standard card, it's insane. Anyway, just my thoughts. Right, that's it. Some new cards, new stuff, new reveals. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Hopefully you found it useful. Hopefully you found my thoughts interesting. Let me know what you think. As always, talk to me in the comments, follow me in my various forms, and join Discord. All of the links are down below, plus the link to the playlist where I'm covering all of the Blood and Iron stuff. There's probably at least one more of these to go before release, although I don't actually know. We're still keeping an eye on how many things are out. But on the whole, I'm very excited for the 28th. So, as always, take care of yourselves, be good human beings, and I'll catch you next time.